Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm 2 hours after you, so it's 10:30, not very early. And thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored to start off this conference. And Paul has just put the link to my slides into the chat, and I'll share my screen. So I hope you can see my my first slide. So what's I'm going to offer you today is to come on a journey with me, where I'm for the last few years I've been thinking about learning, creativity, and more recently collective intelligence and how they connect, and I'll get into that a bit later. Um, so today we have to start a talk like this addressing the big things that we have to meet, global challenges. And I wanted to look for a very nice picture showing something, a striking picture showing uh, something global, because we have very large global challenges. And I found this one, but then I found this one. And this is from an international conference on global challenges. And I'm just going to let you watch it. And this is maybe, and you ask you to interpret it for yourselves. We all know about the global challenges and we would our humanity faces today. And this is perhaps one of the most famous um, authors writing and talking about them today. And he mentioned artificial intelligence, biotech, and climate change as as challenges we need to address. And his book came just before we got to know global pandemics again. So he didn't mention those, but this is an interest. His point of view is interesting, and everywhere we go, we are met with um, being asked to do something about where we are, because the future our students face includes really wicked problems, wicked in the sense of them being very difficult, very complex. So complexity, and it's quite evident for us all that the challenges can only be addressed collectively. And our job, the people who are here at this meeting today, is try to create relevant learning paths for our students, and so that they can participate in addressing these challenges. Um, we're all well rooted in adult education, and from the last century we have the classical adult education credo, where learning is supposed to be practical, useful, applicable. And we had this credo, train your participants for direct self-directed learning. So as they learn a new language or new skill, we should also train them for self-directed learning and foster critical thinking. This is something we've been fed with all through the last century and into this one. But then we have long lists of 21st century skills, which the large institutions, European Union, OECD, World Bank, etc., charge us who work in education to support. And the ones maybe I just take out which are relevant to what I'll be talking about with you today, is learning how to learn on the job with groups and collaboratively, meaning what I am have been occupied with really since I started teaching at the university, is that my teaching can be in such a way that the skills my students acquire through learning will be such that they are better at learning on the job, learning with groups, and learning collaboratively, and continuously developing their skills, and be in that way more competent for these challenges we have, and we look in the eye every single day. So when we talk about this, how our job, our task, which is creating learning events, and that means teaching. And when we talk about this, we can look at it from many different perspectives. And for the last few years, I've gained a lot by comparing learning and creativity, and then more recently adding the point of view of collective intelligence. So I'd like to invite you to walk with me through some of the things I've learned there and how they connect to this challenge. How do we organize learning which is relevant today, and which supports our learners into jobs and projects which address the global challenges we all are facing. So I'll start off with learning, and then I'll go over to creativity and then collective intelligence, and then with a practical example, or a few practical examples, show how I connect these all together. So learning, of course, we're in Denmark, so we use one of Denmark's best scholars on adult education, his definition on learning: the process that living organisms lead to permanent capacity change, and which is not solely due to biological maturation. So something which you do to increase your capacity. That's his definition, and we can work with that. And so when we're thinking about learning, we are thinking about, how do people learn? How can we support learning? How can learning be improved? How can people get better at learning? And then what role do we have? So these questions will be hanging around what we're talking about. But we have a persistent problem, and that's expressed in this picture of the Nürnberger funnel. So if you go back and read about the Nürnberger funnel, people were creating ways of teaching which would kind of magically and automatically make people wiser and more knowledgeable. And what's been disturbing me for quite some time now is that the general discourse on learning still seems to be dominated by the vocabulary of a transmission model. So where learning is about accumulating information and teaching is about distributing it. And this is very, very prominent in the Icelandic language. If even the Minister of Education talks about people fetching education, like if they were going out in the shops and get some potatoes, you go and fetch some education. And that's what you do by participating in a course. And one reason maybe why this is happening is they're they're misinterpreting or misusing an old way of talking about how to participate in learning. But this is still there, and this how we talk, as you know, influences practice. So from my point of view, I think too many learning events are organized with this transmission model in mind, and they do not take into account current knowledge about learning and the realities of modern life. And this often makes learners passive. And I wonder, is that your experience? If this is true, we are probably cheating our learners. And that disturbs me. Thing is, modern theories on learning are somewhere else. And I'm talking about the learning which matters in our discussion. So they depict learning as something learners do, not something that happens to them. And the theories, they use words which are synonymous with creating: build, construct, interpret. So nothing about, delivering and acquiring. If you go a bit deeper, so lots of theories talk about learning as an active process. And from my research and my experience, for example, if we talk about motivation, why do people learn? They usually do it to deal with present needs. And we have this very, very evident today, where because of COVID, in Iceland, for example, the government is putting extra money so people can take courses in the summer cheaper. So what happens is that when we have crises, we always think about what can we learn. So we use learning events to address crises and things like that. And then the second point here, adult learning is often connected to work and finding solutions to work problems where the solutions are not known. And people create new solutions through their learning. This is, of course, from Engström's idea of expansive learning and activity theory. And this is also very evident with Wenger and his communities of practice. And thirdly, learning as the result of an adult's creative engagement with ideas. I think we all have the experience of teaching people, and after the event, seeing that each participant took his own value with him home. They took different things. Each learner takes different things with him home from the event. And here, I mentioned this a bit before, adult learners use learning events for creative purposes, dealing with change and crisis. So this is both people who work within education or politicians, but people as well. You go through a crisis, and if you just go into the research into participation, you see this. You see that a large proportion of adult learners are there in connection with something which was some sort of crisis or some sort of change. And from here, a small just picture to show what I'm talking about. I expect you know Piaget's depiction of 3 stages of learning: cumulative, assimilative, and accommodative learning. And for me, it was really useful to see when Illeris added the 4th one, transformative, and their examples of that are Ilya Engström's expansive learning, transitory learning from Alheit, and Mesereau transformative learning. And he calls all these transformative learning. This is something we might call higher order adult learning. And incidentally, this is also when you're reading about collective intelligence, we're very often talking about what people call third loop learning, based on the idea of first and second loop learning, and then some people have added the third loop learning, which is this kind of transformative learning. And so these are three guys you probably know who have very much influenced my thinking on learning, and just a few citations from them to bring in the point. Mesiro, who introduced transformative learning, talks about learning as a process of construing and appropriating a new revised interpretation of the meaning. So this is something that people really have to work with. They have to do it themselves. Wenger goes even further, the concept of community of practice. He also uses a word, calls it the theory of social learning, is a perspective that locates learning not in the head, but outside it, in the relationship between the people and the world. So if the learning is taking place between us, what does that mean for the way we organize it? And the same is evident with Engström. He talks about expansive learning as learning which emerges as practitioners struggle through developmental transformations. And this is exactly what we need to help our learners to. They need to be at home in this kind of learning. They need to have methods, they need to have experience of this kind of learning. And so from my point of view, we need to organize the learning events in such ways that they meet methods, and they are offered the opportunity to work and learn in this way. So this is kind of from the point of view of learning, and I'm going over to creativity now, and creativity is the study of human ingenuity, how humans solve problems, generate new and useful ideas and artifacts. So a few more questions. How do people, this is what people have been studying when they think about creativity. How do people create? And can people learn to create? For many years, people thought that creativity was something that only a few of us had. And I'll get into that a bit later. And then if people can learn to create, can they be more creative? And what about the creative process? What can we know about this? Is it something special? And then more recently, what happens when groups are creative? And of this, of course, we can then go back. Can groups learn to be creative, etc.? When you're studying creativity, you very soon bump into the idea that the research into creativity has come in three waves. So the first wave was the kind of studying the creative individuals. Who are creative? Why are they creative? What's special about them? This kind of lost wind. People, I think the last real book about this was Csikszentmihalyi's book about creativity in 1994. So after this, we moved, and even actually further back, the research moved into the creative process. How do people create? What is going on when people are creating? And is there a flow, and can people learn this way? And then finally, where kind of most of the research today is about group creativity, or in a social, cultural point of view. So what I've learned from which connects to learning, and this is what I'll be doing with collective intelligence in a few minutes as well, is see how does this work in groups. I left out practical ideas for learning because we are kind of at home there, but if you go into the research and see the questions they're asking about when do groups create, when are they best, when is the best creation going on in groups. And there are many research projects which have addressed this, and Sawyer is one of the guys I read a lot of, and he's written a lot about this, and I base this a bit on him, but this is from many other places too. So if we think about group composition, we want to support creativity in a group. Then, we want to support creativity in a group. We can think about the group composition. And what we find out is a diverse group of participants supports creativity. Clear common goals, which is something which we see all over the place. But suitability, or suitably different or suitably alike. So you need, this connects to the diverse group. How alike are we and how different are we? And I like to say, for example, in Nordic cooperation, we are so alike that we understand each other, but so different that we can learn from each other. So there's this kind of fit. Very different people in a group, that will interfere with work. Groups are creative when they're in a point between dependence and independence, and this often kind of moves back and forth. The same is with freedom and constraints. This is well known in art. Use only paint, or use 100 and write a poem on Twitter with 140 characters. These kinds of constraints, they kind of spur creativity. If we look at the process, it's in the Schnittstelle, like we say in German, the point where organized and unorganized work meet, and we have a common goal, common aim. We know brainstorming, and we know all about its needs to be improved, and so we need to be very what's it called, we have to think about what we're doing when we use brainstorm, and the process needs to be facilitated, and everybody needs to be activated. Everybody needs to be active in the group if the group if we want to get the most out of the group. This is the results of questions: how can groups create best? If we compare this with learning, if you want to create a learning community, we have similar evidence in many researches on learning. When did people learn best? This is just, I cite here one article, but a diverse group supports learning. I'm trying to play around here with the picture of you because I want to see some of you. Sorry about this. Yeah. So group composition, we have so many similar ideas. Diversity, plan for diverse groups, make everyone feel welcome, plan for a good mix of control and freedom, and respect boundaries, individual versus group. These are things that you get out of reading about group composition in learning communities, and you see this is very similar to what's going on in creativity. And the same is with process. A good mix of organization and chaos. I think a lot of you have experienced that when you're in this point between organization and chaos, interesting things happen with the group. To facilitate the process and help the group find common goals and a good mix of cooperation and competition. So my results are kind of very many similar things going on in when we think about creativity in groups and learning in groups. And this me to the direction that creativity and learning have very much in common, and thus we can use methods from the practice of creativity to support adult learning. Now, the last chapter here is about collective intelligence. And this, from my point of view, is a really interesting point of view on human endeavors. And there people are thinking about how people in groups, large and small, often can reach better or smarter results together than alone. How, you know, we often the whole is better than of its parts. Questions that this field of research are asking, and this is maybe a relatively new field of research, although you can find people using the word or this phrase collective intelligence back in the 1890s, 1880s, and they use it in just about the same way we do today, how a group is intelligent and how but there's not very much writing about it, and it just rises exponentially during the last 30 years. So there's been a real growth in writing about collective intelligence. And what we see, we are wondering, can groups be intelligent? And the answer is yes. We can really measure the intelligence of groups and then compare groups who are doing different things to find out what supports intelligence in groups. And then how are they intelligent? And can they be more intelligent? Can we do something to make a group more intelligent than it would be? And how can we do this? And then maybe the rise of talking about collective intelligence and wondering is this question: how can IT support collective intelligence? And what maybe one of the pushes came a few years back. Maybe some of you remember the book Wikinomics. So where we read about many different ways to use collaborative writing, and then people growing and learning together, like we have with Wikipedia, which is one of the most cited examples when people talk about collective intelligence. So I'm here, the study of collective intelligence, a new and emerging field, and I decided to use a few ideas here from Malone's book Superminds, especially the last part here. But it's really interesting to see, people are inspired by intelligent, self-organized behavior of other creatures. Bacteria which create different collective structures in different environments. Ants and bees, how they build their colonies, how they move their colonies, how they find food, how they deal with attacks, and these very simple organisms can work together and swarms of birds and fish. And these ideas have been taken into apps and all sorts of services online to make groups more intelligent. And so when we talk about collective intelligence, we're talking about all sorts of groups, also even families, companies, societies, who together in many different ways are thinking together. They're learning together. And the study of collective intelligence is asking these questions we saw before, trying to understand why do some groups find very good solutions to their problems and others not. What are the success factors? What is going on? And in his book Superminds, Malone talks about, groups them into, he talks about big groups, although he talks about small groups in that book too, but he talks about types of superminds, hierarchies, which we know in companies and governments and etc. Democracies, which we also know where everybody has a vote. Markets, which are more automatic in a way. Communities and ecosystems. These are he goes through these different kinds of superminds and what laws are there and how they function. And what's interesting in this field, as well as with learning and creativity, but especially with learning and is that we use results from many different types of or many fields of study. So if we want to think about, how do we support what is going on when we have collective intelligence, when a group is more collective. And another very good book on this stuff is the book by Jeff Mogan, and he presents 4 infrastructures which we all know. And the first one is rules and structures. So our cultures create which carry knowledge on to other people and make the group more, in a way, successful and therefore more intelligent. So stories, for example, we could say that, here I'm citing Robert Bly, birds, they learn through their genes how to fly and how to be a bird, but humans, they need stories to learn how to be human. So stories and taboos and culture are ways that we advance, that we go forward, and are tools or infrastructure which support our collective intelligence. So when we have made the stories a part of ourselves, we have accepted some taboos, we behave in specific ways, and we don't have to think about that, and then we can concentrate on the problems at hand. And through history, we learn methods, we create institutions which take care of lots of things, which make it easier for us to deal with many other things. And then they mention intelligent artifacts, and there I'm brought back to Vygotsky, whose idea of mediation, the triad of subject, object, and mediating artifacts. These always go. We think through this me and this thing, me and you and the mediating artifact. So we really think through our tools and objects. And just as we said a few minutes ago, Wenger, who says thought and learning is not in our brain, but in our connection with things and others. So we're talking about, pen and paper, a URL, books. Think about a man and a horse, how they become one, and drivers and the traffic signs, um, and Morgan takes a really nice example about the development of safety in cars. 100 years ago, it was really dangerous to drive a car, and now safety has gone up. We have, relative to what it was before, we have very few accidents, and this is built into the way we build the cars, the materials we use, rules and laws and safety equipment aboard, and now recently more artificial intelligence. So we create structures and things which make us more intelligent, and as individuals and as groups. And just, you're in a group, and you can go Google, you can search for information. You need to continue your discussion much faster. So the things we have, they help us. And then society's investment in infrastructure. When we have money, I mentioned the sagas first. During the 1200s, the Icelandic economy was quite strong, so people could sit down and write down our common sagas. You folks in the Nordic countries or in Scandinavia didn't do it. For some reason, we wrote them down, or our people here back, they were your people too. So, but there was something about money. You needed to have people in schools, and they had the money to write. And so, yes, schools, firms, universities, charities. These are infrastructures which support our intelligence, our collective intelligence, and then finally networks, societies of mind. We talk about Newton giving us the law of gravity, but it's quite evident from what was going on. He was writing, he was conversing and writing to lots and lots of people who supported him in finally getting to this idea. And we have in England the Royal Society, we have Linux, Wikipedia, and scientific publications as examples of how this has been growing. Okay, then back again to groups, because we usually have small groups, teams in our education. And what have they found out? When are groups intelligent? There have been some research, some studies on this, and from the Center for Collective Intelligence, there are I'm citing this research, and if you click on here, you can find that an article on that, and there's a YouTube video on this too. But what they were studying is what influence does having a lot of very intelligent people together in a group have on collective intelligence of a team. And that was very little. We're having people who are socially perceptive, and they use some known psychological tests for that had very much influence on the collective intelligence of the team. Also, the number of women, or the diversity in the group, and funny thing is, only men, they were not very collectively intelligent, and 50-50, not either, but with a few more women than men, then they had the most collectively intelligent groups. And when you had only women, it went down again. And what they kind of found out was, usually, statistically speaking, women score higher in social perceptiveness. So that was kind of an explanation for that. And finally, cognitive style diversity. So having people who think in different ways. So if you have a moderately diverse group of people who think in moderately different ways, if you have everybody thinks the same way, the group is not very collectively intelligent. And the same as if you have a group where people are very different, it doesn't work very well. But if there's a moderate diversity, there it works very well. And then the final point is kind of communication. So more communication is better, and equal amounts, that is to say that people speak equally much. Yeah, I don't need to go into the last part. So from here, the question, can IT and artificial intelligence make group more intelligent or support their learning? And this is one of the biggest fields today. And Malone has a very interesting point of view here. He talks about tools, assistants, peers, and managers. So you can have tools like Excel, email, Twitter, etc., which support a group in doing things. And and for my master's thesis, I had to go through lots of handwritten text. When I was in graduate research, I could do in seconds what it took me months to do with handwritten text. And then colleagues use expert systems where the computer does the analysis as well and just asks, is this right? So our tools have been evolving, and they support the group's work. Email, Teams, I think has been doing very much to support a group's intelligence. And then we can amplify with these tools with AI, and they can become assistants. If you use Evernote, you'll notice that Evernote creates links between your notes, and so this is connected to this note and this. Have you forgotten that you wrote about this earlier, etc.? And some people play around with Alexa and Siri. And at university, students can use Turnitin to get feedback, automatic feedback on their writing. And some of the things here in this slide came because PowerPoint suggested design or pictures.
You are running out of time.
Yeah, I'm running out of time. Yes.
Okay.
So and finally, they can be peers, and they can be managers. I can be managers. They can tell you what to do. This is like traffic lights and Google what's it called, Maps, which tells you what to do. But the funny thing is, in their research, people kind of didn't like AI to manage them too much. So yeah. So this is the theoretical background, and I think I'll just stop there.
Okay. I'm looking at the mediating artifact called the chat, but we don't have anything in there, so it gives me the opportunity to ask about something. When you're talking about this, Hrobjatur, what is the role of distance? How much does it mean that we are separated? And the question of presence and things like that. Have you researched on that?
Let's say I've been doing a lot of experiments. So this connects to lots of things I've been doing with my students, and through my readings in on collective intelligence, we things we can do, the tools we can use, and which can augment our collective intelligence and therefore also learning, when we use tools which help us to for example, collate our learning. So asking my students to, for example, write together online. And that's been really interesting. And this is why I think it's important for us to teach our students and expect them to do this, because they have been very afraid of correcting each other's writing. And we need to learn to write together. So if we want to be more collectively intelligent as groups, we need to put our learning out there. And I've been using wikis and all sorts of different tools like that to support my students in writing together, and also sharing information. From what's it called, uh, just putting, look, I found this article in about this, I found it interesting because of that, etc. And all the way to special tools like social bookmarking. We're in a special database, interesting materials connected to what we're doing. Does this answer your question, Henrik?
Yeah, at least to some extent.
I could take one more example. There's a really interesting case in Australia. Dr. David Kellerman, he has been using Microsoft Teams in his 400 people course. And as you know, maybe Microsoft Teams allows you to create bots. So with 400 students, they are very active in the chat. And the bots he has created, they assign the questions to the right teaching assistants. You have 400 or 500 people in the same chat, so it's very difficult to keep that alive. So he has bots which assign the questions to the right assistants, and other bots so that just before exams, based on the questions the students have asked and based on how they've been doing on tests, the bots suggest reading materials to prepare for the exams.
Yeah.
So after he put his courses online, students are much more happy and they're learning much more.
Great. Do we have questions from others? Just feel free to ask or comment. When we talk about collective intelligence, and you also brings in the concept of community of practice and activity system, but basically, could you say that such a collective intelligence, is that a community of practice or a community of ideas or something like that?
Let's say it's one of the supporting structures. So a community of practice can be a place where people learn and are more creative, they learn more, and they're more intelligent than they would have been. But what has communities of practice have also been criticized for the fact that they just become guilds which keep up doing the same thing. They are stuck in how we are used to doing things.
I think because that would be my point, that if you take a community of practice, or to some extent also activity system, they are sort of learning systems for newcomers, but for the members who are there, they are more sort of stabilizers, and the learning arises when they are challenged and when they change. And how do we fit in with the concept of collective intelligence here?
Well, I think it's this question: how, when you ask yourself, how can we be more intelligent? Can we create structures? Can we ask questions? Can we add tools which support our learning and make sure that we do not get stuck? So it's the questions we ask. It's the way we work together. So very often communities of practice, they collate information about how things are done.
Mm.
That's just a tool. You need to use it creatively, and the best create communities of practice, they are dealing with questions which nobody has any answers to, and then they help communities learn how to deal with questions you don't find in the literature. Donna, you need to turn on.
Sorry, you'd think I'd know by now. I was interested in the findings you shared with us about the makeup of groups, which makes them most effective.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a comment on groups that are most diverse, that will not necessarily be a positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, could you just share a little bit more with us in terms of what does that diversity mean? Is it a cognitive diversity, or is it a kind of diversity in terms of language or gender, or what diversities are we talking about?
Well, what I've noticed in the literature is both on creativity and collective intelligence is that they talk about cognitive styles. So people who think in very different ways, they tend to find it more difficult to work together. So it's more the cognitive styles which is here the problem. You need a difference in the cognitive styles. You need to have an interest. You need to have, you need to be so different that it's interesting to hear what the other one has to say. But if he says something or thinks in ways which are totally foreign to you, and you could cope with it, I expect people will close down, and they cannot, or they find it much more difficult to cooperate.
I mean, that's very understandable, but I think it's difficult to see where the line is. If you were forming groups, how would you know until you're in that situation? And I suspect, because the one of the ways maybe to help address it is to encourage open-mindedness, so that we don't close down as quickly as we might, as soon as we're challenged by someone else's thinking.
Yeah, I think you're true. That's true, and I think that's a very good point. And often you have a group, and you can't choose the members, and then what can you do? And so we have tools, we have methods. So, for example, if we go over to the process, how do we talk together? And if we what I found so interesting is that the findings from collective intelligence research are just the same as you get from even the old encounter groups from 1970s, where you say, they talk, be your own what's it called, leader of the meeting, and speak for only a short time. So if everybody speaks kind of equally, the influence of one is not too much. So and groups, another thing is, group needs to be facilitated. So if the facilitator has tools to support people in working together, I think that can kind of even make very diverse groups function well together, if he chooses the right rules for collaboration, and the right questions, and the right ways of working together. And to please Henrik, we could move some of these discussions online. Kind of, if people think very differently and have problems discussing, okay, let's put this discussion online.
Thank you. We are getting closer to the next presentation. So I would like to thank Hrobjatur for this interesting presentation, and you all know that you can access the PowerPoints through the chat, and I think you can also ask Hrobjatur questions if you have more questions, and use the chat function there.
By all means.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
So Rolf,